Okay, Genesis chapter 47, decoded. Okay, we left off. Um, I was explaining the allegory between Joseph and Jesus, how there's a lot of connections there, and how this may pertain to an end time story. I believe it is by studying this chapter thoroughly. I think maybe even you might agree to that as well. There's something definitely interesting going on in this story, more than what meets the eye. You can even see the 12 tribes, the Jews, right? And how Joseph made himself strange to them. And then later on, he had the ability to make himself known to them, very Jesus esque, right? Supernatural. And then there's the 7 year famine, just like the 7 year tribulation. And there was also the 7 to 7, right? The 7 good years, plenty, the 7 bad years, just like in the last story of Jacob, right? He's 7 years for the Jews, 7 years for the Gentiles. He served 7 years for Leah and 7 years for Rachel, right? So you see the 7 to 7 throughout the Bible. You get the same thing with the 7 year curse. So a lot of people don't know why there's a 7 year tribulation, and it all stems back from the sevenfold curse onto Cain, right? And then the 77-fold curse onto Lamech, right? And you see the 7 and 7. You see the good version and the bad version. You see like Christ being associated, and God also. Well, God is Christ, and Christ is God. But you see God being associated to 7, right? The 7 day creation story, the 7 colors of the rainbow. And Jesus even said that you don't forgive somebody just 7 times, but you forgive them 77 times. So you see this 77 throughout the entire Bible, and a lot has to do with sin. And um, yeah. Okay. So with that being said, also too, this pertaining to end times, possibly, um, you can even see that possibly even going on nowadays, right? You had the two Revelation 12 signs. Some people say they were 7 years apart. They're more like six, but um, there might be something to that. I believe there's two signs. There's this big old debate online that people think that it's one's the false sign, one's the real sign. I believe they're both signs sent by God, and they both pertain to the same thing. One's for the Jews, one's for the Gentiles, right? That's why they both have the same symbolism, but one of them is more decorated than the other one, and it's because they kind of symbolize the same thing but a little bit different. And I believe that's marking the beginning of the 7 years of plenty that we already went through, right? And then marking the 7 years of famine. I'm not saying we're going to go through a famine. I'm just saying that maybe things are going to start turning up. And I made a whole video on that. And then, like a week later, the whole Israel war thing popped off. So maybe there's something to that. And then all the people out there that made videos on the same thing, suggesting similar suggestions, it's hard to refute the whole Israel war. And then you see all this other stuff going on that's connected to it. You have the 2024 elections, and all the stuff that's connected to those people in power. There's a lot of stuff popping off. All right, something to keep our eye on. I'm not saying this and that. I'm just suggesting that, hey, man, these might be connected, right? These signs in the sky. I find it no coincidence that a week later things pop off, but to be argued, and just something to keep your eyes on. Okay, and I believe this is a good story, Joseph, like again, to get a good little insight on what's going to happen when all this stuff does pop off. Okay, so Genesis chapter 47, verse 1. Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen. Goshen means to draw near, because Joseph is drawing near. Jacob is drawing near Egypt, um, quote unquote, in this particular story, the land of milk and honey, right? Usually Egypt pertains to the godless world. But in this particular story, it's the opposite. And it's proof that God can utilize whoever he wants anywhere, right? Like Joseph in Egypt. Okay. Verse 2. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. So in these decodes, we decode the names and the numbers. And in this particular one, 5 biblically is associated or means God's grace and favorable unto humans, which we see that in this particular story. Very clear. Just like Joseph is very favorable to his brethren, right? The 12 tribes, the believers, quote unquote. Even when they weren't believing in him, he still hooked them up with food and all that stuff. Okay, verse 3. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. That was to get their own segregated land. So Joseph prepped them, primed them for that, because he knew exactly how to do it and told them exactly what to say. Verse 4. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks. For the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spoke unto Joseph, saying, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. Verse 6. The land of Egypt is before thee, and the best of the land make thy father and thy brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. If thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. Okay, and this kind of reminds me of, just like I was saying, like the land of milk and honey. It's reversed. It's reversed from the all the other stories of the Bible, that Egypt is actually usually the enemy, but in this particular story, I think it's a double meaning. It just signifies that God can use anyone, anywhere, and you never know who God has His hands on. Um, it's that's the beauty of the Bible, right? Throughout the Bible, like the servant will become the master, and all that goodness. Just the lowly people will be exalted. God uses the unlikely, and you see this perfectly in this story. We are automatically have our guns up, right? When it comes to politicians and politics and kings and queens and presidents and leaders, but we just never know. This is a good example of that. That's why we have to stick to the word and use discernment, and uh, keep our eyes and our ears on the Lord. And I believe God will put it in our hearts to let us know who to trust. We just can't completely discount anybody in the limelight because they're on the other side, they're rich or whatever. I don't know. By studying this story, this shows that God can use anyone, rich, poor, short or tall, fat or skinny. Anyway, verse 7. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? Verse 9. And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of my life of my father in the days of their pilgrimage. So we'll analyze the number 130 on this one. Okay, so uh, Noah's Ark was 100 cubits long. It was 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits high. So there's 130 kind of connection there. And Jacob did start this pilgrimage, obviously, at the age of 130, and there was a total of 66 family members there. So, 66 is connected to the books of the Bible. So you might have like a completion number there because we are in the twilight of Jacob's life. Hope is found 130 times in the Bible, which is kind of cool because that's exactly what the story is all about, right? End times, we hope in our Lord and Savior. They put their hope into Joseph, right? Allegorically, God. Right? It's all about hope. So I believe the message is clear with the 130. Okay, verse 10. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, and the best of the land in the land of Ramses. And Pharaoh had commanded, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all of his father's household with bread according to their families. So Joseph, playing the allegorical Jesus, nourished his father and his brethren, the 12 tribes. And just to give you a little insight, they specified bread, right? With bread according to their families. So we know that Jesus is is our manna, our bread of life, is the bread of life. And we know that more than just spiritually, he'll nourish us, but he'll physically nourish us too. Um, I find it very coincidental that we don't go thirsty or hungry except on the Day of Atonement, right? Um, Being how broke we are, poor we are, how you know homeless we might be at the current moment, or you know, uh, God still finds ways to fill our bellies and spiritually as well, and provide for us. Um, yeah, we don't stop and think about that. Like Jesus is actually saying that, like I'm the bread of life. Like we don't realize that He's actually the one that's providing us, um, nourishment through our bodies to go up and go work 8 hours a day, right? Or providing, keeping our family strong enough to keep the roof over our head, right? Peaceful enough. We don't see all the connections that God is working in our lives until we stop and think about it. It's more than just spiritual bread that He feeds us with. You know, it's more than just a spiritual temple or a spiritual household. It's all literal, and God is the glue of all that stuff. Verse 13, and there was no bread in all the land. So that, for the believers, there's no bread. See, for the unbelievers, I'm sorry. For the unbelievers, there's no bread in the land. So that means it's like a land forbidden of God, of Christ. For the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. All right, verse 14. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they had bought. And Joseph bought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, Give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. Sounds like some hard times, right? And Joseph said, Give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if money fail. And they bought their cattle unto Joseph. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph. And Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses, and for the flocks, and for the cattle of the herds, and for the asses. And he fed them with bread for all their cattle, for, for all their cattle for that year. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, verse 18. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, We will not hide it from my Lord. There's your Lord connection. That might be a stretch for some of you, but I think we made plenty of Jesus connections here. How that our money is spent, my Lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my Lord, but our bodies and our lands. This story sounds very Book of Eli-esque, right? It's getting down to slim pickings here. Wherefore, verse 19, wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land, buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed, that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. Verse 20, and Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them, so that the land became Pharaoh's. Verse 21, as for the people, he removed them to the cities, from one end of the borders of Egypt, even to the other end thereof. Okay, so I'm going to pause it right there. And this also kind of reminds me of Isaiah, right? Isaiah is like an in-depth version of this. So if this is a foreshadowing of the tribulation from the famine aspect, but there's a lot more going on with just the famine. It means food is scarce, but also we know that there's an allegory by now going on. Let's just take a look at Isaiah just to see the insight of these times, right? So we know this. So if Joseph is allegorically Jesus, right? So that means Jesus has to be amongst us. And we see in Isaiah that it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and the nations shall flow onto it. So we see that that the Lord's house is on top of the mountains, right? So the Lord is here on earth. Thy kingdom come. And Isaiah 2 and 3 is like the transitional period, right? I believe that's exactly what the tribulation is. It's one age to the other age, right? Some people call it the age of Aquarius. I think that's the false age that they try to already start, but it's the millennial age, right? The millennial reign is the true age of Aquarius. It's the real one. The And the 7 year tribulation is the transitional period of that. We see God here. We see people that have to work really hard, right? Right here, Isaiah 2:4, and he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people. See, there's people that are non-believers or sinners or whatever that never repented. They're still here. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. So there's a lot of unbelievers here. This is a great insight. So if you have time to read the entirety of Isaiah, go for it, man. You even see this connected to Revelation, right? So if you don't think this is end times, we have right here. This is the second verse based on this rock theory. To go into the clefts of the rocks and into the tops of the ragged rocks for the fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Remember the great earthquake? And then they go into the rocks and they say, rocks fall on us because they're afraid of God, because God's outside watching everything. There you go. And it gets even deeper too, Isaiah. I hate to stray a little bit, but let's see. You even see like here you see that, that day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet and their cowls and their round tires like the moon, their chains and their bracelets and their mufflers and their bonnets. He's completely stripping us everything, just like in the famine. All this stuff won't mean anything anymore, right? We're going to be working hard all day just to make a day's pay, right? Measure of wheat for a penny. You have it all right here in Isaiah 2 and 3. You have it in the story of Joseph. You even have like there'll be a scab on people's head, on the crown of their heads, right? Kind of reminds you of possibly even like the whole Rona thing, right? And then people um, will lose their thick hair and they'll go bald, right? And there's a alopecia vid connection out there. You can Google it. It's kind of strange, man. It sounds like near times. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Um, I just thought it was kind of cool to show these connections there. All right, back to verse 21, and I'll start at verse 21 again just to get the context. As for the people, he removed them to the cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. Verse 22. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned to them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion, which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their lands. Verse 23. Then Joseph said unto the people, Behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. I'm going to pause it right there. It just reminds me of the book of Eli and how they fought over the power of the book, right? The book showed them how to rebuild civilization and how to survive the famine. That's why the book was so sought after. Um, and you can kind of see that in this particular story. You can see that it shows, you know, through the graces of God, right? Meaning Joseph, how a country can or a nation can survive a famine and come out more powerful than they did before going into it. And it shows, you know, you can see the power exchange in this particular story, how God is going to have claim all the power in the end. God is showing you right here, this is how I'm going to do it. You know, I'm going to be the powerful nation on here. I'm going to come out stronger on the other side. Kind of cool. And if a nation were to try to utilize this tactic or this plan, you're missing the big point because Joseph is the one. Allegorically, Jesus is the one that's actually being blessed by God in order for this to be executed. Okay, I thought it was kind of cool. It just reminds me of that movie for some strange reason. Okay, verse 24. And it shall come to pass in the increase that you shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own for seed of the field, for your food, and for them of your household, and for food for your little ones. And he didn't even completely forsake everybody, you know? He still gave them food and all that stuff. But they weren't hooked up like the 12 siblings. Verse 25, and they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. Verse 26, and Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. 27, and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. They had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. 28, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And Jacob, not Jacob, but 17 years. 17 means complete victory, biblically speaking. And you can kind of see that with God, right? This whole story, complete victory. Verse 29, and the time drew nigh that Israel must die. And he called his sons Joseph and said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. So now we're kind of fading away from the allegory. Um, the under my thigh part is a direct connection to the loins, meaning the offspring, as we've studied previously, and it's a parallel verse or a parallel sentence. You see that in every single story at some point, and is due to blessing the offspring or the bloodline. Verse 30, but I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. 31, and he said, Swear unto me. And he swore unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. All right, and that's pretty much it. If you get a chance to study Isaiah 2 and 3, go for it. It's a good little read, and you get a good insight onto eschatology. Same thing with Daniel as well. And there's some Enoch verses too that pertain to end times. And also Matthew or any of the apostles. Jesus gives a great insight to end times as well. All right. Hope you liked the video. Any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching.